should be hot. Okay, now we're bringing for you. So once again, the Gemara tells us that Yaakov Avinu was not punished for the 14 years that he was learning Torah in Beis Ever. So let's go first through the chronology, and then when we learn it inside, it'll be easy. We know that Yishmael was 14 years older than Yitzchak. And we know it very simply because Avraham Avinu was 86 when Yishmael was born, and he was 100 when Yitzchak was born. So Yishmael was 14 years old. When Yitzchak was 60 years old, he gave birth to Yaakov and Esav, which means that when Yaakov and Esav was born, Yaakov and Yishmael, their uncle, was 74 years old. Okay, now let's look at the next time frame. The next time frame that we have is Yaakov Avinu got the brachas. When did he get? How old was Yaakov Avinu when he got the brachas? This is where we need a clue of how old Yishmael was when he dies, because the Torah tells us that right after the brachos, when Yaakov ran away to Beis Lavan, Esav went and married the daughter of Yishmael. And we dash from the psukim there that Yishmael died, and we know how old Yishmael was when he died. And Yishmael was, I believe, let me look inside. It says that Yishmael was 137 years old when he died. So if Yishmael was 137 years old when he died, and Yishmael was 74 when Yaakov was born, so what's 137 minus 74, which will tell us how old Yaakov was at the time. So 137 minus 74 is 63. So that places Yaakov Avinu. So by the fact that the Torah tells us that Yishmael was 137 when he dies, who cares when I rush up pagans? The fact that the Torah tells us that Yishmael is 137 when he dies places Yitzchak at 60, places Yaakov at 63 years when he left his father's house. Make sense?
Why wouldn't the Torah simply tell us how old Yaakov was when he was born?
If the Torah wants us to know how old Yaakov was, the Torah could have told us how old Yaakov was. Why do we need to go this way to figure out how old Yishmael was? A beautiful kasha. So Chaim was holding up his finger like this, but you can't see in the picture. You have to move it further to the left. Now we can see your hand. Okay, now Chaim wants to say teretz.
He asks that kasha only because you misinformed us. Who cares when a pagan dies? Couldn't call Yishmael the tshuva, right? I'm sure we know that. And that way, it tells us both pieces of information. When a tzaddik dies, okay, because he did tshuva, and also when Yaakov knew how old Yaakov was.
I don't know, in light of the Yishmael, but
we call people Yishmael claim level.
I hear.
But
According to the Sischam says the reason why the Gemara does it this way, the Torah did it that way, is the Torah is trying to draw a contrast between the life of Yishmael and the life of the tzaddikim. And when we get to the Gemara that focuses on that shortly, you're going to see what Yishmael was busy with when he was getting older, and we'll see what Yaakov was busy with. And the Gemara is trying to draw that contrast. The Torah is trying to draw that contrast between how a Jew behaves and how a Yishmaeli behaves.
I wonder why I didn't get any sympathy with it.
So the Gemara tells us, so let's see where we're holding. So because we know that Yishmael was 137 when he dies, we know that Yaakov Avinu was 63 when he went to Beis Lavan. So now let's think of what we know. He went to Beis Lavan, and he was there in Beis Lavan, I believe, 20 years. 14 years working for his two wives, and then 6 years working for his money, for his panosa. And then who was born that allowed him to leave? Yosy Simon was born that allowed him to leave. So based on that, how old was Yaakov Avinu? How old was Yaakov Avinu when he left? It would be 63 plus 20. That would place him at 83 years old. Does that make sense so far? Right? We're talking about 83 years old. Okay. Now, how old was Yosef when Yosef was standing in front of Paro? Yosef was 33 years old. Was 30 years old, right? So 83. Yosef was 30 years when he was standing in front of Paro, and Yosef was born when doesn't make a difference. When he was standing in front of Paro after he left jail, he was 30 years old. We know he was born at the end of the 14 years, which means what's 83 plus 30? 113, right? Okay, so I'm a little bit off. I think maybe Yosef was born after the 14 years. I'm a little bit off on the years.
I think he was in jail for 14 years because he had 12 years and then he made a mistake, so they gave him an extra 2 years.
That doesn't matter. We know for a fact that Yosef was 30 years when he was standing in front of Pharaoh. That's a fact. The Torah tells us the very. Yosef was 30 years old. I'm sorry? Which 14 years? But he was in Beis Lavan. Yaakov Avinu went to Beis Lavan. He had Rachel. He got married to Rachel. He married Leah. And then Yosef was born. Right. I'm not sure exactly how those years line up. So let's have a look. So let's say I'm a little bit fuzzy there. We'll get to the Gemara exactly. But let's say it was 14 years, and Yosef was born. I think it was more than 14 years. So my cheshbon was it was 83 plus 30, which would have been 113, which is off a little bit. That's off on the Gemara.
Yeah, he wasn't born right away. She was in Akara for many years.
But I know as soon as Yosef was born,
That's right. Then he went back.
Right, because it says about Yosef Lahava, and that was, I believe, that was after about 20 years, I think, that he was in Beis Lavan. So let's say he was.
Yes, it was 20 years.
83. So 83 plus 30. 83 plus 30 would place him at 113. Okay, I might be off. We'll see the Gemara in a minute. Huh? Well, I don't know. We'll see. Now we have 9 years because from when Yosef came in front of Paroi, there was 7 years of Sava, and then 2 years of hunger. And in the second year of hunger is when Yaakov came down to Mitzrayim. So that would be 113 plus 9, which would be 121, right? I'm off. The Gemara is going to make a cheshbon that it'll only be 116. So I pushed too many years in here, so we'll get to it in a second. So the Gemara says, based on my cheshbon, I skipped in too many years. So it's going to be 116. But we know that when Yaakov Avinu came to Paroi, he was 130. So how could Yaakov Avinu be 130? Where are the extra years that we're missing? That's the question that's going to be. So let me go back into the Gemara. I messed up a little bit on the cheshbon. The first part of the cheshbon was good. 63, we know for sure that Yaakov was 63 when he left his father's house to go to Lavan. And the question is, how many years was he at Beis Lavan? So that's where I'm a little fuzzy. So let's see the Gemara inside. Zok Gemara, Omar Mar, and we're starting on the first line of Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Laman Himnu Shnoisav Shol Yishmael. Why did the Torah have to tell us how many years Yishmael lived? Why? It was Kedei Layaches Bahen Shnoisav Shol Yaakov. Because through calculations, we can figure out from Yishmael's age how old Yaakov was, and that teaches us an interesting lesson. He was 137. How much older was Yishmael than Yitzchak? We established with our base Shnim. Yishmael was 14 years older than Yitzchak. Avram ben Shmoinim Shana v'shei shanim. The latest Hagar is Yishmael Avram. Avram was 86 when Yishmael was born. Avram ben Ma'ashana v'yivoled le'Yitzchak b'nai, and he was 100 when Yitzchak was born. So there's a 14-year age gap between Yishmael and Yitzchak. Yitzchak was 60 when Yaakov and Esav were born, which makes Yishmael 74. He was 74. So let's think. How many years are left over from Yishmael's life between 74 and 137? Shit Mitzlah, 63 years, which is exactly how old Yaakov Avinu was when he left his father's household. How do you know that corresponds to the death of Yishmael? The Tanya, Yaakov Avinu b'shoshin isbarach me'aviv, when Yaakov got the brachas from his father, ben shishim v'shaloi shana. He was 33 years old, 63 years old, I'm sorry. Uvoy b'perek meish Yishmael. In that period, Yishmael died. How do we know Yishmael died? This is a very important link, because it says, Vayar Esav, ki borach. So let's look at the whole pasuk, because this is important. Vayar Esav, ki berach Yitzchak es Yaakov v'shilchos epaden Aram, l'kachas loy misham isha, v'vorach ha'yisoi, v'yitav v'leimar lo'sika chishiv l'shknam. Therefore, Esav also wanted to stick the family, but he just picked the wrong part of the family. So he went to Yishmael, meaning Yishmael must have been alive if he's going to Yishmael, and then he took Machlas Bash Yishmael. He took the daughter of Yishmael, whose name was Machlas, Ben Avram, Achois Nevoyos. She was also the sister of Nevoyos. Why is that relevant? You know she was a sister because she was Ishmael's daughter. Al Noshav on top of his wife's Loilish. So let's see how the Gemara analyzes this puzzle. El Yishmael, Bigachas Machlas Bas Yishmael, Achas Nevoyos. Frank the Gemara. It said Machlas was the daughter of Yishmael. We already know Nevoyos was the son of Yishmael. So why do I need the puzzle to tell you that this was also the sister of Nevoyos? Any day she Achas Nevoyos. Malamed teaches you Shekisha Yishmael. The incest that was going on there was insane. Yishmael was Makadish's own daughter Machlas, and he didn't have a chance to consummate the marriage, and he died. How do we know this? Because it says Vayelech Esav El Yishmael. That means when Esav went, Yishmael was still alive, and then Yishmael died. So what happened?
Well, it's a lunch.
Shekitcha Yishmael, right? He was
Well,
Makadosh Esav. Oh, so Yishmael married his daughter after Esav. I'm sorry, you're right. So I mamish read it like a namoritz.
Remember, he did tshuva.
Okay. Oh, so it wasn't incest. I was getting all excited. I fell shot. So Yishmael, he went to Yishmael. Yishmael says, "Okay, I'm going to marry my daughter up to you, Esav." What a fine chusin. Kick of a tie the chusin to the finin. Koidim kol ha'aynik of Yitzchak Avini. The yichus is a hot. I shine it's nice. Read it. Duvid Amelech I read it. What more can I look for him for my daughter? And then Umeis, and then Yishmael died because when he saw what the bill was going to be for the wedding, he had a heart attack. And then what happened was, you see in the Voyes, the brother of the Kala, he took over the finances. He already had the life insurance, so he made chasna. He married off his sister to Yishmael. To Esav. Sorry, he married off his sister to Esav. And so Zok Gemara, we see in the Voyes Achel Shitin Utlas. So 63, which is the age that Yaakov was when he left his father's household. The Arbesar and the 14 years Adam Masal Yosef. So it was 14 years till Yosef was born. I was mistaken. I thought it was longer. It was 14 years. And we know what Rashi says. We know that when Yosef was born, that was when he finished working for the daughters. And as David asked, Yosef was born later because Rachel was on the Korah, true. But Rachel he gave her before the 7 years. He worked for 7 years for Rachel after he had already married her. After he married her. So whatever the case is, Yosef was born 14 years in
One minute, the pasuk, there's an explicit pasuk that says that Yaakov lived in Lavan's house for 20 years.
Right, because after Yosef was born, he still started working for him to make money.
So where do you get the other 6 years?
Okay, we'll get there, but let's stop. Let's do the cheshbon. So, which means when Yosef was born, we're not focusing on the base Lavan. Now we're focusing on Yaakov's age. When Yosef was born, 63 plus 14 is going to be 77. Hashivim v'shivim. So we know that. Oh, born Shmuel. We know that when Yosef was born, Yaakov Avinu was 77. Right, that's good. And we know Yosef and Shloshim Shana ba'amda b'lefei Parai. And we know Yosef was 30 years when he stood in front of Parai, which would place Yaakov Avinu at 107. Right. So that was Homeya v'sheva. That means when Yosef was in front of Parai, Yaakov Avinu was 107. Now, how many years after Yosef stood in front of Parai, how many years later did Yaakov come to Mitzrayim? It was the Sheva, Shav the Shiva. There was 7 years of the 7 years of plenty, right? Because Yosef was there right before those 7 years. They tied to the Kafna. And we know Yaakov came after the 2nd year of hunger. That means 9 years later, 107 plus 9 is 116, which would have placed Yaakov Avinu at 116 when he came down to Mitzrayim and he was introduced to Parai. Uchsiv, how old was Yaakov when he was introduced to Parai? Vayomer Parai el Yaakov kama yemei shnei chayecha. Vayomer Yaakov el Parai yemei shnei megurai shloishim u'ma'as shana. He said, I was 130. May of a shitzav, he was 116. The teretz is Social Security kicked in probably at 120. So because of that, he wanted to say that he was a senior so that he can get Social Security and get all the seniors discounts. But that's probably not shot. So Yaakov was 116. So how come Yaakov said he was 130? We're missing 14 years here. So he must have been 14 years older. Where do these 14 years go? It's not counting those 14 years, but there were another 14 years somewhere, which means before Yaakov Avinu came to Beis Lavan, he sat on lynch for 14 years. So that pushes everything off by 14 years. So instead of being 63 when he got to Beis Lavan, he was 77 when he got to Beis Lavan, and then Yosef was born 14 years later, which means when he was 91, right? And then when he was 91, Yosef was born. 30 years later, Yosef, so when he was 121, is when Yosef stood in front of Pharaoh, and 9 years later, when he was 130, is when he came down. The Tanya we learned, Hoya Yaakov bebeis Ever Mutman Arba Esrei Shana. He was hidden, sitting and learning in the Beis Ever for 14 years. Ever Meis la'achar sheyored Yaakov v'inu la'aram naraim shtei shana. Ever died 2 years after Yaakov left the Beis Lavan. So Yaakov finished his 14-year stint. I don't know what made him decide that it was time to move on. He moved on, and 2 years later, Ever died. Nimtza comes out, when Yaakov was by the Be'er, when he met Rachel, ben Shivim b'Sheva Shana, he was 77 years. Not 63, but 77, because he had spent 14 years in Beis Ever. So Zok Gemara, how do you know that Yaakov Avinu didn't suffer the 14 years? So the rest of the time, besides the 14 years, it was 20 years, right? It was 22 years actually, and we're going to have to see how that all lines up. Titania, Nimtza Yosef Shapirish Me'aviv Eser Mishtayim Shana. Yosef disappeared from his father for 22 years. And we know this. Rashi says, how old was Yosef when he went to the brothers? He was 17, right? And he showed back up when Yosef was 17 when his father sent him. Rashi tells us. So if he was 17, and when did Yosef see him? 27, 30. When did Joseph see him? When did Yaakov see him? Yaakov saw him when he was 30, when he was 39, right? Yaakov came back and saw him when he was 39. So what's 39 minus 27? So that's not 20, that's not 22 years. I'm making a mistake. No, 17. So what's 39 minus 17? That's 22 years old. That's 22. So there's 22 years that Yosef was missing. What, that make sense? Because he was 39 when Yaakov came. I'm sorry? Because he was 30 when he stood in front of Pharaoh. And 9 years later, Yaakov came to Mitzrayim. So he was 39 when he got reunited with Yaakov, and he was 17 when he got sold. So 39 minus 17 is 22. So that's how we know Yosef had been missing 22. Now we have to figure out how we know that Yaakov got punished for 22. So Kashem Shapirish Yaakov Avinu Me'aviv, the same way Yaakov also was separated from his father for 22 years. How do you get the cheshbon? The Yaakov Tlosen Vishisha Havyan. Yaakov was 63 when he left the house of his father. So Kum Techois Ella Arbeisar. So right now we have a little bit of a cheshbon of how long was Yaakov missing from Yitzchak. So far, our cheshbon is a little. We have the 14 years of Beis Ever, and then we have the 20 years where he was by Beis Lavan. So what's 14 plus 20? That's 34, right? That we have 34 years so far. And if I take 14 away from 34, because I credited him for Beis Ever, that ends up with 20. So we're still off by 2 years, right? Because Yosef went missing for 22 years, right? Does that make sense? So let's have a look. I'm sorry? Where do you see anything about 36? So we're going to see it in a second. Because right now we only have 34, right? We only have 34. Because we have the 14 years of Beis Ever, and we have the 20 years of Lavan. So we have 34. So we're missing 2 years. Right? We have 34 based on our calculation, but the Gemara is telling us that it was 36. So we have to find 2 more years, which is fine. We'll get there. It was 36 years. So obviously, we're at 34. So obviously those 14 years don't count. But the question is, we're still missing 2 years. The Beis Lavan, Esrim Shnin Hava, he was only Beis Lavan for 20 years. So we're missing 2 years because we had 14 from the Beis Ever. We have 20 from the Beis Lavan, which is 34. You take 14 away, you're left with 20. But where's the extra 2 years? So tomorrow, Yaakov left the Beis Lavan. He didn't go straight back to Yitzchak. He took his time on the way back. It took Yaakov Avinu 2 years to get back from the Beis Lavan to Beis Yitzchak. So there was an extra 2 years there in the Cheshvan. The Tanya Yotza Mayram Narayim Ubaloi the Sukkos. He came to the Sukkos. Vasasham Shemoina Asar Chodesh. He spent a year and a half there. Shenemar v'Yaakov Nosa Sukkosa. Vayivan Loi Bayis Ulemekneu Asar Sukkos. And then over Beisel also Shisha Chadoshim Vikra Zvachim. And he spent 6 months in Beisel and brought Korbanos. So therefore, if we add it up, Yaakov Avinu was 63 when he left his father's house. He was 77 when he got to Beis Lavan, because he was in yeshiva for 14 years. He stayed in Beis Lavan for 20 years, which put him at 97. And then it took 2 years to get back, so he got back at 99. So from 63 to 99 is 36 years. 36 minus 14 is 22. So Yaakov Avinu got punished for 22 years, and that's why Yosef went missing for 22 years, because Yosef went missing when he was 17, and Yaakov reunited with him when he was 39. So that takes care of the cheshbon. And all of this is only possible because we know how old Yishmael was when he died. Because that's the key number that lets us know that Yaakov was 63 when he left his father's house.
You know, we asked all these questions, why the Torah have to say this, why the Torah have to say that. Did we ever ask the question why the Torah did not say that? I'm curious, why did the Torah not say that?
Because we knew he would figure it out.
Yosy, sorry. So what are we saying? That Yaakov should have gone back home after Shem V'Eber? He's punished for not going home?
I guess it was a punishment. I guess he did what he had to do, but the Lamaisa, he caused tsar to his parents. So it's very hard for you and I to understand what he did wrong. So I'm going to default to what Rav David Kogla says. Anything that you and I can appreciate was wrong, Yaakov Avinu wouldn't have done. So exactly what the avla was, he was doing what he had to. His father sent him to Beis Lavan, right? So it's hard to understand how this all works. So Chaim asked me if moving forward now it's no more gadata, it's all halacha, and so far it is halacha. So far what I prepared is halacha.
This wasn't Hadalah either. This is
Okay. But now we know exactly how old everybody was at what time. If you read the Megillah backwards, so it's not clear yet if that means pasuk by pasuk, word by word. There's different shittas. Lo yotza, you won't be yotza. Kar al peh. What if you read it without reading it in Tzad from a cloth? Or kar targum b'chol lashon, or you read it in any other language other than lashon kodesh. Lo yotza, you're not going to be yotza. Aval karin oisel loy azos balas. But you are allowed to read it in a foreign language to a person who understands that particular foreign language. The only language that you don't have to understand and you'll still be yotza is v'aloyish shama ashuris. If someone who does not understand Hebrew and heard it being learned in Hebrew, he will still be yotza. That's the special part of learning it in Lashon HaKodesh. Kara Sirugin. Like Shamat Chakon, he acts it out, so you'll for sure understand.
Yossi,
Yes.
I thought Ashurus was a script, and it's not a language.
So it must be. I think Ashurus is a script, but usually that script is a script for writing Lashon Kodesh, because here clearly it's talking about Shama Ashurus, so it must be that Ashurus refers to a language as well. So I guess when people use Hebrew letters, they usually write Hebrew, unless they're writing a sign on the store, fresh bread daily. Yotza. Okay, Karasi Rugin. What if you read it in bits? So you read, you took a break, you read a little bit, you took a break, or umisnamnan, you're following this lead in between sections. Yotza one is still Yotza. What happens if Hayakosva, he was writing a Megillah, or Darsha, he was darshaning the Megillah, so he wasn't laning it, he was just looking at some sukkim, umagia, or he was correcting the Megillah, he was checking it. Im kiven libay, if he had kavanah to be Yotza, Yotza, he'll be Yotza. In lab, and if not, lo yotza, he won't be yotza. We had this lagabe mitzvahs trichas kavana, and the Gemara on the tzad that mitzvahs ain't trichas kavana. The Gemara said in Kimin Levi means if he wasn't even reading the words right, he was reading the words as they're written but not as they're pronounced. Then Kimin Levi, if he pronounced them properly, then yotza v'm lav lo yotza. Ha'isa kshuva v'samu v'sikra u'v'kumus u'v'kankantoim ala niyar ala diftera. So these are all types of inks that are not the right type of inks, or types of paper that are not the right type of paper. Lo yotza, that's not a kosher Megillah. Actually, Tzuba Shuris, Al Sefer Ubediyot. Kosher Megillah is written in Lashon HaKodesh with the right Sav, on Klaf, and with the proper date. We know how to meet. How do we know? How do you know that you're not Yotze reading the Megillah backwards? Regarding the Megillah, Kiksovam Uchizmanim. So the pasuk says, let's have a look inside. It says, Kimu v'kibla Ayudim aleim v'alzarim v'alkal nivim aleim v'layaver v'liyos oisim eshnei yom eila kiksovam v'chizmanim. So kiksovam is compared to kizmanim. Mazmanim l'mafrei aloi. Just like we don't have a time machine, so Zman is always in the right order. Af ksovam l'mafrei aloi. Frank Gemara midei kriya ksiva hacha asiya ksiva hacha. It says Bnei Israel did it kiksovam v'chizmanim. It doesn't say it wrote it kiksovam v'chizmanim. So tomorrow the chsiv liyos oisim eshnei yom. We have to use a different pasuk for our makar. The chsiv hayomim ha'ela nizkarim v'nasim. So ishkish zechira le'asiya. The zechira, which is the writing of the Megillah, which is the lighting of the Megillah, is compared to the asiya, to the actual story. Ma'asiya le'mafrei aloi. Just like the story is done in order. Av zechira le'mafrei aloi. Tana we learned v'chein b'halal. Halal as well has to be in order. V'chein b'kriya shema as well. U'v'tefilla. Correct more halal minola. How do we know that halal has to be done in order? Rabbi Omar tichsiv mi mizrach shemesh ad mevoyai, from sunrise to sunset. That's in order. So just like we say in halal, mizrach shemesh ad mevoyai, shem sheshkiyas uzrichas achama lo yahapku. Just like sunrise and sunset won't change positions. Kach mehul shem Hashem. So too, when we're saying halal, we have to say it in order. V'loy l'mafrei. I'm sorry.
Sorry, if we have a concept aim mukdamuchim b'Torah, why are we so particular about making sure that's in order?
The Torah says over stories that are out of order, but there's specific words here to teach us that these things have to be done in order. So why the Torah is marked, but here to go in order and they're not, I don't know.
No, there's always a reason for it to be out of order. We learn smichas, you learn something out of it.
When we say in Torah, there's always something that we learn out of the fact.
That's
quoting that from the Ramban. Okay. Okay. So how do we learn that? So Rashi says, just like the day doesn't change, it goes hour after hour. It doesn't go backwards. So too we read the halal in order. It says Yishem Hashem Mevorach Me'atav Adolam. So what does that mean? Rashi Kavyoso Yehi Yishem Hashem Mevorach. It should be like its normal state. Kavyoso Yehi Hil Hashem Uberchasa Kisidra. Everything has to be in order. Rab Nachman Bar Yitzchak V'Temer Rab Acha Bar Yaakov Amar Mehacha Me'atav Adolam. So Me'atav Adolam means from today and forever it has to be in order. Krishma. How do we know Krishma has to be in order? The Tanya. Krishma Kiksova. Krishma has to be like the way it's written. Divrei Rebbe. It could be in every lashon. So this brisa is not discussing the order right now. Right now, it's discussing the language. We're going to have to see how that translates into an order. My time with the Rebbe. What's as far of Rebbe who says that Krishma has to be only in lashon kodesh? Amar Kra. It says in the pasuk, "V'hayu hadavar ma'ela, v'hayu zok the Gemara." We darshan kavyosin bavyosin. You have to be exactly in its original state. So now we're at the top of the Zayin of base. For Rabbanon, my time, the Rabbanon who says Krishma can be in every language. How do they know that? On Makra, Shema. We say Shema. The Chaloshin Shat Shemaya. Any lashon that you understand is acceptable to say Krishma. In fact, the more of a Rabbi Nami who says Dafka has to be in Lashon HaKodesh, Haksiv Shema. What does he do with the riboy of Shema? So tomorrow, Humi Boyle, Hashmila Oznacha, Mashat Amoitzibipi. You have to say it loud enough that you can hear what you're saying. For Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan don't need Shema for that. You know why? Because they hold command Omer Akare Shema V'lo Yishmila Oznayotza. Even if you say the word so low that you yourself can't hear it, you still be Yotza. So frankly, of Rabbanan who holds that Shema could be B'chalosha in Nami Yaksiv Ahoyu, and that's why Rabbi Dashan Bab Yosin Yehei, they have to be exactly the way they're written. So the Ahoyu who uses Hahulim Boile Shalo Yikra L'Mafreya. So the Rabbanan have an extra pasuk to tell you that you cannot learn Krishma backwards. So we were looking for a makar. How do you know Krishma you can't say backwards? We just found it. For Rebbe, how does Rebbe know that you're not allowed to lay Krishma backwards? He learned it from V'hayu Hadavar Ma'ela. It could have said V'hayu Devar Ma'ela. The Devarim Hadavar. For abundant Devarim Hadavar Ma'mashmi. So now we have a perfect proof that Krishma, even though it's a machlokes, if it has to be said in Lashon HaKodesh or not, but it's unanimous. Everybody agrees that Krishma cannot be laid backwards. We either know it from V'hayu or we know it from Hadavar. Zoktumar Alema Kasava Rebbe. We have over here machlokes. We have a machlokes of Krishma has to be b'chaloshen, or it has to be dafka lashon hakodesh. What is the default? If you need a pasuk to tell you differently, there's got to be a default. So let's say that according to Rebbe, the default b'chal kula is b'chaloshen. Normally, you can say everything b'chaloshen, and you have a special limud by Krishma b'hayu to say it has to be in lashon hakodesh. If you're going to tell me that every halacha in the Torah has to be b'dafka b'lashon hakodesh, why do you need a special pasuk by Shema to tell you that it has to be in Lashon HaKodesh if everything has to be in Lashon HaKodesh? Zok Gemara, no. Even though it's possible that all other things are only Lashon HaKodesh, we still need V'hayu by Shema to tell you that Shema should be in Lashon HaKodesh, because you might think that Shema is different than everywhere else. It's true. So Gedaitach Shema Kirabanan. By Shema it says the word Shema. So even though by default the Chalatar Kula has to be Lashon HaKodesh, since it says Shema, you might have thought that Shema is different and Shema can be b'chaloshen, so that's why you need the word V'hayu to neutralize the Shema. Kazer Chamana V'hayu. Zok Gemara Lemek Shavi Rabbanon Chalatar b'Lashon HaKodesh Nemra. The Rabbanon must hold the default is the opposite, because since they needed Shema to tell you that Krishma is b'chaloshen, it must mean that the default is not b'chaloshen. Yisal Kadaitach b'chaloshen Nemra Lama Lila Mechav Shema. Zokimor, the same svar. Really, the default is Lashon HaKodesh, but you might have thought, the default is B'chaloshen. So why do I need Shema here? Since it says V'hayu, you might have thought like Rabbi, because Shema. So we need the word V'hayu because according to the Rabbanan, V'hayu tells you that you cannot learn it backwards. So you need the word V'hayu. But once it says V'hayu, you might think that Shema has to be Davka in Lashon HaKodesh. That's why it says Shema. Okay, that takes care of Halal and Shema. Now Tefilla, because Tefilla was also one of the things on the list that can't be read backwards. Tefilla Minola, the Tanya, Shimon HaPakuli, Hister Shmoyne Esrei Brachos, Lefnei Rabbi Gamliel Ala Seder B'Yad. Shimon HaPakuli set up the Shmoyne Esrei in front of the Rabbi Gamliel in order in Yav. It wasn't just Rabbi Gamliel, it was Meah ve'Esrim Zkenim, u'behem kamen Neviim, tiknu shmoyne Esr brachas ala seder. So they set it up in a very, very specific way, and that's why we stick to that way. Rashi said ala seder, kemishpat hamakrois u'chadiyel v'kamon. The Gemara actually goes through in detail why everything is in that order, but that's how it was set up. Why was he called Shimon HaPakuli? Rashi says could be he was in the wool business. But I'll call upon him, that's how it was done. Tosfos has a kasha because Rashi says in brachas that the middle brachas ain't lam seder. If everything is in a specific order, how could Rashi say in brachas the middle brachas ain't lam seder? So Tosfos says all it means is that if you make a mistake in the bracha in the middle brachas, you just go back to the beginning of that bracha. But if you made a mistake in one of the first three brachas or the last three brachas, you have to go back to the beginning of those three brachas. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah.
All you have to do is say, got it?
Yeah.
And then I don't bother you?
Yeah. Okay. Because basically, it's telling you that you're being recorded, right?
Got it.
So yes, you got it. Zok Tahela Gemara Vayt. So now we're going to get into the order of our Shmoyne Esrei. Tanu Rabbanan. Minayin she'ayimrim avos. How do you know that you make the first bracha of avos in Shmoyne Esrei? How do you know about that bracha? Shenemar, it says Havu Lashem B'nei Elim, and Elim means the titans, and avos, the avos are the titans, as Rashi says. Haskir lefanav es Ele haaretz, the strength of the land. Zok more weiter. The next bracha is Mechaya Mesim, which is Gevuros. Shenemar Havu Lashem Kavod V'ois, the strength of Hashem, that's Mechaya Mesim. The next bracha is at the Kadosh. Shenemar habu Lashem kavod shemoi hishtachavu Lashem b'hadras kodesh. So you see that's the order. So the next bracha is at the choinin. Umaro loimer bina acha kedusha. Why is that the choinin after the bracha of Ata Kadosh? Shenemar, it says the kedusha is kadosh Yaakov v'salakei Yisrael yaritzu. So it talks about kedusha, and then right after that the pasuk says v'samachlei v'yedu toye ruach bina. So you see bina is connected to kedusha. Umaro loimer shuva, because after Ata Chonin we say Hashiva Sheftenu. No, not Hashiva Sheftenu. We say, what's the bracha after Ata Chonin?
Right to the shua.
Right to the Shuva, that's right. So Umaro loimer shuva acharbina tichsiv ulevava yavin v'shav v'rafaloi. After you understand that your bina, it leads to tshuva. Ihachi lema refuah basra the tshuva. It says v'shav v'rafaloi. So why is lachlanu right after the bracha of tshuva? Why isn't rifa'enu the bracha right after tshuva? So from lois hagadaitach tichsiv v'yoshev el Hashem v'yirachameu v'laleikenu ki yarba l'sloyach. It says right after tshuva, it says slicha. Right after tshuva, it says slicha. My
Slicha comes first. Aren't you salech before the tshuva?
No, first you do tshuva, then we have a slicha. Slicha means Hashem forgives us. First we do tshuva, and then Hashem forgives us. You have one pasuk that places refuah right after tshuva, and then you have another pasuk that places slicha right after tshuva. How do you know which pasuk to go with? So Gemara Ksiv Karachrina, we have a third pasuk. It says Haseleach l'chal avinoichi haroifi l'chal tachloichi hagoyel mishachas chayechi. So you see clearly that after slicha, then comes refuah. And then it says hagoyel mishachas chayechi. Lememra the geula urefuah basar slichahu. So you're telling me that geula and refuah is after slicha? I vaksiv yeshava rafalon. Doesn't it say that refuah comes right after tshuva? When it says v'shava rafalon, that doesn't mean the physical refuah comes right after tshuva. That's the spiritual refuah which leads in to the slicha. But the roifei l'chal tachlu eichi, which the pasuk places after slicha, that's called refuah saguf. That's the refuah that we're referring to. So therefore, the order makes sense. First Ata Chonin, then tshuva, then slicha, then geula, then refuah. Umaro loymar geula b'shvius. Why was the seventh bracha, the bracha of geula, which is re'ena, amarava mitoich shasidin ligoyel b'shvius? Since our geula is going to be in the 7th month, lefichach kavua b'shvius. That's why you made it shvius. It's not the 7th month. I apologize. Rashi says mitoich ligoyel b'shvius. Shavua sheben David ba, the year that Ben David will come, that the Mashiach will come in. Chaluk mishar shanim is different than the other year because I remember chaluk shanim rishayna rav, which can be the 7th year. That's what it means. Because the first year is going to be hunger, v'loy rav ad uvishvius melchamos of motzoi shvius Ben David ba. So it's shvi, not the 7th month. It's the 7th year. It's motzoi shmita. For Amar Mar, Mar said b'shishis koilos. B'shvius melchamos and b'motzoi shvius Ben David ba. So oy bazoi, it should be the 8th, not the 7th. So tomorrow milchama nami aschalta de geulahi. Where did we hear that phrase? Aschalta de geula. The milchama that's going to lead to the geula is aschalta de geula, and therefore we say the geula started already in the 7th year. Zogt gemar weiter. Umaro loymer refu b'shvius. Why is the bracha b'refeinu the 8th year? Amabacha mitoich shenosna mila b'shminis. Since mila, which the mitzvah of mila was given on the 8th day, shetzricha refuah, which of course needs a refuah, lefichach kavu b'shminis. That's why they decided that refeinu should be the 8th bracha. Umaro loimer birchas hashanim b'tchias. Why is baruch aleinu the 9th bracha? Amar Alexandri keneged mafkiei sharim. It's to counteract the rishoyim that create inflation, that make the prices go up. So there's a special placement of a bracha in Shemona Esrei to stop true inflation and to stop bite inflation. All these rulers who make inflation are considered rishoyim. We're going to see the chsiv shvor zeroya rosha, and it's referring to someone who is jacking up prices and causing inflation. The David ki amra b'chias amra, and David said this. David said this in the 7th capital of Tehillim.
Interesting. You taught us in Dr. Zion in Brochus. Alexandri also tells us.
You remember the Gemara,
Alexandri tells us
right?
that what keeps us from doing Hashem's will? The Rishon.
Right.
The Sorsh and Esau. That was
Right.
also Rabbi Alexandri. He's busy with the
I hear. Okay, so the reason why Baruch Aleinu is the 9th bracha is to avoid inflation. Umaro loimer kibbutz galiyot. How did you remember that? How do you remember that Alexandri said? Can't see myself out yet.
You teach me a lot of stuff.
I teach you. Umaro loimer kibbutz galiyot la'achar brichas Hashem. Why is Kabbalah Shofar kibbutz galiyot after the bracha of brichas Hashem? Let's look at the pasuk inside. It's a beautiful pasuk. Va'atem hara Yisrael anpachem titenu. Your wings you should put up. Ufarechem tisu la'ami Yisrael ki kervu lova. Va'atem hara Yisrael anpachem titnu ufarechem tisu la'ami Yisrael ki kervu lova. So what we're talking about once you have ufarechem tisu, which means you have parnosa. Rashi says Parechem tisu la'ami Yisrael ki kervu lova. Alma Rashi's kibbutz galiyos is based brichas Hashanah. You see, when your land is improving and your animals are improving, everything's improving, that's when the gula comes. So you see, there's a connection between the parnasa and the gula. And once Hashem brings us back from Golos, the next step is Nasa Din Bereshayim. That's when Hashem is going to do a mishpat on the Rishayim. Rashi says, even before we get settled in Yerushalayim, as soon as there's a kibbutz galiyos movement, right away Hashem is going to punish the goyim. Shenemar v'ashiva yadai alecha ve'etzroif kabor sigayach. Rashi says, "Kodim shenishak Yerushalayim shenemar v'asira kol b'delayach." Hashem is going to take away all of the balavera. Like they came, and through that v'ashiva shaftayach, which is the pasuk that the Gemara quotes, v'ashiva shaftayach kavrishona v'yatzech gavatchila. I'm going to put you back good rulers in place. That's why these psukim are kept close to kibbutz galiyos. That's why there's this order. Once Hashem takes care of the Rishoyim, then kolu apoishim, then all of the poishim are taken away. Rashi says kolu apoishim she'enim aminim b'das Moshe. They didn't believe that Moshe is Torah from Shemayim. The Shever Poishim Hanuzedim, and then so Kol Poishim V'Kol Zedim Imahem, and then it says Shever Poishim V'Chatoim Yachtav will all be destroyed. Then comes Misremamis Keren Tzadikim. So it sounds over here that Vilam Alshinim is mixed into here. I thought Vilam Alshinim was added in. But here, I guess this is the reason why it was added in over here is because it fits in over here. This is not one of the 18. I guess now we're already going with 19. And then comes Vala Chassidim Vala Tzadikim. Vala Tzadikim Vala Chassidim. The Sliv Chalkani Rishayim Agadeya. And what happens after Hashem destroys Rishayim? Tiraymamna Karnois Tzadik. And once we're talking about Tzadikim of Klal Yisrael, the Koilel Geri Tzadikim and Tzadikim, and we include the Geri Tzedek, which is also in our bracha. Shenemar Mepnei Seva Tokim, V'Adarta B'nei Sakein, talking about Yiddish Tzadikim. The Samechlei V'Chiyager Itchem Ger. So you see that the Geri Emes, the Tzadikim, the Geri Tzadikim are also part of that. V'Hechen Misremamis Karnam. Where do the Tzadikim become raised and great? Yerushalayim, which takes us to the next bracha. Shenemar Shalu Shalayim Yushalayim Yishlo Ayavoyach. V'Chivin Shenivnes Yerushalayim. And once Yerushalayim is built, then it's Samach David, then David could come. Shenemar Achar Yeshuvu, the Bnei Yisrael, Uviksu es Hashem Elokeim, Ves David Malcham. V'chivin she David Basat Tefilla. Then comes Shema Keilenu. Then we could daven Shenemar B'Aviyoshim L'Arkachi, V'Simachtem B'Veis Tefilasi. V'chivin she Basat Tefilla. Then comes Ritzei Bas Avoda. Shenemar Aleseim V'Zevchein L'Retz Al Mizbechi. V'chivin shebos avoda, bos atoida, which is moedim, shnemer zoyveach toidi chabdanu. Okay, I guess we'll stop over here because we're getting already close to Shachris, and the Mincha will be mamshech tomorrow. So we just finished moedim, so we still have to get to the end of Shemoneh Esrei. I'm sorry? A little bit of a yeah. But we're learning of why Chazal set up the order of our brachas the way they did.
A couple of days ago, we were learning about Mordechai and Esther, Persian name.
Right.
I remembered this was Mitzvah. I thought to myself, what did he say in
You looked it up.
I checked it out. And
Kayach.
Go ahead, have a wonderful day.
now when I see the Mitzvah, I checked up what is the name Alexander mean?
Right.
It actually means a defender of men. That's the